Frances Farmer was once one of the most sought-after faces in America. But then one day, she vanished from Hollywood in a storm of horror and chilling rumors. Her glorious career, with more than a dozen leading roles in classic films, was quickly overshadowed by whispers that she had been forced into a mental institution and subjected to a lobotomy. Yet, what the public knows is only the tip of the iceberg. Frances was not just an actress. She was living proof of the dark side of fame, power, and silence. These never-before-seen private photos will take you on a haunting journey through the heartbreaking truth of a tragic icon. Watch till the end to understand why she remains one of Hollywood's most mysterious legends. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea, or just water, and sit back as we begin this journey together. Frances Farmer was born in 1913, and her childhood was a mess from beginning to end. At just 4 years old, she witnessed her parents' marriage fall apart. After that, she became the victim of her mother's unpredictable temper. Dragged from place to place, little Frances and her siblings were forced to grow up far too quickly. By the time she was 11, her mother could no longer care for the children, and Frances and her siblings were sent to live with their father. The train that took her away from her mother's house became an unforgettable turning point. It was then that Frances realized adults weren't always to be trusted. As she entered her teenage years, Frances began to question the things most people took for granted. She didn't believe in God, justice, or salvation. In high school, she wrote an essay titled "God Dies," which caused an uproar in the community. It wasn't just a rebellious piece. It was a cry for help from a soul torn between reason and faith. As she grew older, Frances became fascinated by the philosophy of Nietzsche, who gave her the words to describe the emptiness she felt inside. She sought truth through knowledge, art, and her own pain. With no family support, Frances worked tirelessly to support herself and pay for her journalism studies. By day, she waited tables. By night, she taught, acted, or laboured in a soap factory thick with chemical fumes, all to keep her dream of education and self-expression alive. Then, destiny came knocking. Just before graduation, Frances won a prize, a trip to the Soviet Union. That journey would change her life forever. In Moscow, she witnessed the Moscow Art Theatre, an experience that set her heart ablaze. On that stage, she saw the true power of art, its ability to reach the human soul more deeply than any prayer ever could. From that moment on, Frances knew exactly where her path would lead. In 1935, Frances Farmer stepped onto the stage with fiery eyes and a heart full of ambition. Not long after, a sharp-eyed talent agent discovered her and quickly brought Frances to Paramount Pictures, a place where dreams were manufactured, not nurtured. At her very first audition, Frances astonished everyone. That face, those eyes, that voice, they radiated an energy unlike anything anyone had ever seen. On her 22nd birthday, Frances signed a 7-year contract with Paramount, and her life was forever changed. Before she ever appeared on screen, Frances had to undergo a reconstruction process to become the so-called perfect star. Paramount altered every tiny detail. She was told to fix her teeth to achieve a flawless smile, trained relentlessly in posture, speech, and expression. They taught her how to walk like a goddess, smile like an icon, and speak as if every word had been scripted by a director. Frances obeyed, but deep inside, unease began to grow. Hollywood wanted to turn her into a product, a flawless face, while she only wanted to be herself. Still, Frances's true nature couldn't stay hidden for long. She was strong, willed, defiant, and refused to play the perfect goddess that Paramount wanted. She preferred simple clothes, minimal makeup, and never pretended sweetness to please anyone. To the studio, that honesty was dangerous. They wanted faces that smiled on cue, spoke, rehearsed lines, and bowed at the right moments. Frances was different. She dared to say no. Paramount grew so frustrated that they even asked her to change her name to something more seductive, easier to market. But Frances refused. "I was born with this name, and I'll die with it," she said. The statement enraged studio executives, but made the public love her even more. In her first year, Frances appeared in 4 consecutive films and quickly became one of Paramount's brightest rising stars. At the same time, she fell into a passionate affair with a young actor from the studio. The relationship burned intensely and vanished just as quickly. The following year, she married Leif Erikson, a fellow actor she had barely known for long. Their marriage was like a hastily shot scene, beautiful but shallow. Frances soon realised that in Hollywood, becoming a star wasn't just about acting, it was a lifelong role. Even off camera, she was expected to live like a movie goddess, something she could never accept. Frances preferred staying home with a book, hated cocktail parties, and declined most invitations from the elite. To Paramount, she was the star who refused to become Hollywood. But that very defiance made her dangerous. When Come and Get It, 1936 was released, critics hailed Frances as a rising talent. Yet her relationship with director William Wyler turned into a nightmare. Wyler once crew remarked, "The best thing I can say about Frances Farmer is that she's utterly unbearable." To the press, Frances became a favourite subject, not for her talent, but for her difficult personality. They called her cold, arrogant, even unstable. In truth, Frances was only trying to hold on to herself amid Hollywood's chaos. Each day, she felt the industry squeezing her soul tighter. She despised shallow films where everything from the emotions to the smiles was fake. Frances longed for depth, for roles that reflected real human struggle. But in Hollywood, that was rarely allowed. She eventually left for the East Coast, where she joined the play Golden Boy. There, she rediscovered her love for the stage and found herself in an affair. Though still married to Leif Erikson, Frances began a relationship with playwright Clifford Odette, who was already married. Soon after, Odette coldly ended things and returned to his wife. To make matters worse, he replaced Frances with another actress for Golden Boy's next production. By 1940, Frances's life had entered its darkest chapter. While rehearsing for the 5th column on Broadway, she began drinking heavily to numb her pain. Her professional reputation crumbled. Studios refused to work with her, and she no longer cared to work with them. Her marriage collapsed, leaving her utterly alone as the world around her dimmed. Her behaviour began to reflect her fragile mental state. One night, in a drunken haze, Frances was arrested for driving under the influence. The court fined her $500 and gave her a 6-month suspended sentence, but the punishment of the law was nothing compared to the torment in her mind. She fled to Mexico, hoping to start fresh with a new film project, only to discover that the script was unfinished and production had been cancelled. Every door seemed to slam shut. In despair, Frances turned again to alcohol, and this time, Mexican police arrested her for public disorder before deporting her back to the United States. What happened next shocked the world. In January 1943, Frances Farmer's string of tragedies reached its breaking point. Because she had failed to pay the remaining fine from her DUI case, a warrant was issued for her arrest. To make matters worse, a hairdresser filed assault charges against her, claiming she had broken his jaw. When police stormed her hotel room, Frances, terrified and out of control, fought back violently, forcing them to restrain her. At the station, they discovered she was completely naked. The once proud movie star, now stripped bare and broken. During the trial, Frances hurled an inkwell at the judge and screamed that her civil rights had been violated. When asked about her drinking problem, she bitterly admitted, "I put liquor in my milk, in my coffee, and in my orange juice." The words echoed through the courtroom like a painful confession from a soul that had fallen into the abyss. She was sentenced to 180 days in jail, and as she was being led away, Frances lashed out at the officers, crying hysterically to the crowd, "Have you ever had a broken heart?" Her family, especially her sister-in-law, intervened, pleading for her to be treated in a psychiatric institution instead of prison. Doctors soon diagnosed her with manic depressive disorder and paranoid schizophrenia. The 9 months Frances spent at Kimmel Sanitarium were 9 months of living hell. She was locked in isolation, subjected to brutal electroshock treatments, and stripped of every ounce of dignity. When she was released, Frances returned home physically and mentally shattered. She tried to speak about what she had endured, hoping for understanding, but was met only with suspicion and control. Her mother, Lillian, fought for and won legal guardianship, which meant Frances no longer had any freedom. The two clashed constantly, their relationship poisoned by resentment and guilt. One day, after a violent confrontation, Lillian decided to have Frances committed again, this time to Western State Hospital. 3 months later, doctors declared her cured, but Frances was never truly the same. After her release, she wandered aimlessly, homeless and lost. Police arrested her several times for vagrancy, and each time she returned looking more dishevelled, her eyes hollow and lifeless. Her family, unable to handle her anymore, made the painful decision to send Frances back to Western State once again. This time, she remained there for 5 long years. 5 years of darkness, obscurity, and silence as a once brilliant soul faded into ashes. It was during this period that the legends surrounding Frances Farmer began to take shape. In 1978, writer William Arnold published a shocking biography titled Shadowland, chronicling Frances's life. In it, Arnold claimed that doctors at the mental hospital had performed a horrific lobotomy on her. The story quickly spread and was widely believed to be true, though in reality it was pure fiction. The truth only surfaced in 1983 when a copyright lawsuit forced Arnold to admit that he had fabricated the entire lobotomy story. Sadly, by then, Hollywood had already embraced the myth. The film Frances, starring Jessica Lange, even included a full lobotomy scene. From that point on, there was no turning back. Audiences around the world believed that was the true story of Frances Farmer. After her release from Western State Hospital, Frances lived in constant fear of being institutionalized again and fought to free herself from her mother's legal guardianship. In 1954, the court finally ruled in her favor, declaring her competent to care for herself. Against all odds, Frances began to rebuild her life. Though her new existence was far removed from the glitter of her past, she started humbly, working in the laundry department of the very same hotel that had once hosted the glamorous premiere of Come and Get It. After her first downfall, she married for the second time, a fragile attempt to find stability in a life filled with storms. But that marriage too collapsed quickly, leaving her adrift once more, amid layers of loss. In 1957, both of her parents passed away. Alone again, Frances kept moving forward, her soul hardened by pain. She left the city and settled in Eureka, California, where she worked as a bookkeeper and secretary for a small company. It was there that fate opened yet another chapter in her extraordinary life. One evening at a bar, a man looked at her for a long moment and gently asked, "You used to be Frances Farmer, didn't you?" That man was Leland C. Mee, her third and final husband. Working in the media industry, Miko believed he could help Frances reclaim a piece of the light she had lost. With his encouragement, she returned to the stage, not as an icon, but as a woman learning to make peace with her past. Frances's comeback drew public curiosity. She appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, where she told her story, not glamorized, not excused, but raw and honest, the truth of a woman crushed by fame and loneliness. Though audiences welcomed her warmly, Frances knew that Hollywood's golden days no longer belonged to her. Still, she continued performing, not for fame, but simply to feel alive again, to live truthfully as herself. Then came the 1,960 years that brought Frances even more heartbreak. Her marriage to Miko fell apart, and her old companion alcoholism returned once again. She drank backstage, was fired, and later arrested for driving under the influence. The same newspapers that had once praised her now tore her life apart headline by headline. Yet, ironically, that very scandal drew crowds to her new play, The Visit, hailed as her final resurrection on stage. In her memoir, Frances wrote about that night. "When I walked onto the stage, the entire theatre fell silent. Then suddenly, applause erupted. Fierce, genuine, and so long that it made me cry. They erased all my sins with that applause. It was the greatest performance of my life, and also the last. After that night, Frances never regained her fame. But she found something far more precious: peace. She quit drinking, painted, wrote poetry, and lived quietly. Once a woman who declared she didn't believe in God, Frances found faith again in Catholicism. Perhaps after everything, she realized that forgiveness, both for others and for herself, was the only path to true freedom. But fate had never been kind to Frances Farmer. In the spring of 1970, she was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, a disease silently growing after years of smoking. A few months later, Frances passed away quietly at the age of 56. No stage lights, no cameras, just a few close friends attending a modest funeral. After her death, her memoir, Will There Really Be a Morning, was published, shaking the public once again. In it, Frances described her time in the mental hospital, the rapes, starvation, straitjackets, and being submerged in ice baths. Accounts so horrifying they left readers trembling. However, it was later discovered that much of the book had been completed by Jean Ratcliffe, Frances's former roommate and close friend. Some critics argued that Ratcliffe exaggerated the truth for attention, or to satisfy the publisher's demands. Whatever the truth, only Frances knew for sure. But one thing is undeniable. Her life embodied both light and darkness, both angel and demon, both song and sorrow. Frances Farmer lived and died as a symbol of tragedy and defiance. A woman who dared to love, to err, to fall, and to rise again until the final applause faded into the night. Heat